Happy Sabbath, everyone, and welcome to the final evening of the South Leeward Conference's week of health activities. We have recognized that our lifestyle matters. We have had a phenomenal week. We recognized that we were created to move. I saw many of you moving in ways that I didn't know that you could move before. Dr. Semper was able to do the plank, and so many others did jumping jacks, high steps. It was extraordinary. We were able to receive recipes and cooking demonstrations, and we were able to focus on chronic diseases in men. Monday evening, COVID-19 and men's health. Tuesday evening, women's health. Wednesday evening, we went before the throne of God and we interceded on behalf of those who had chronic illnesses. On Thursday evening, we focused on childhood obesity. And this evening promises to be an exciting one, where we discuss the topic, life is challenging, so much stress. Now, if you have never been stressed, then maybe we should be interviewing you this evening. And so at this time, as we enter into this evening's program, we'll invite Sister Carolita Joseph to begin with a word of prayer, and then we will proceed. Sister Joseph.
Let us pray. Our God and our Heavenly Father, we thank you for the privilege of prayer. We thank you, dear God, for waking us up this morning and for taking us through the day. I pray, dear God, that as we look at this situation tonight in our panel discussion, that you will give us the impetus so that we would know exactly what to take away from this and what to take to others as we learn. Father God, we know that you are the creator of the heavens. We know that you are the creator of the earth. And so, dear God, we come to you every time because we believe that prayer works. And whatever it is with our emotional situation tonight and our health, that you would give us something from this so that we can learn. I pray, dear God, for those persons who will be taking part in the discussion. I ask you, dear God, to help them to remember what it is that they want to say, because sometimes, dear God, we just get certain kinds of moments, and we want to make sure that our audience knows exactly where we're going with our discussion. I pray, dear God, for the leader tonight, Sister Siobhan, so that as she moderates this discussion, that you would give her the words that need to be said and the questions that are asked would be asked in the way that they would not be ambiguous, but we would be able to understand them. We pray, dear God, for Dr. Semper, who is our director in the South Leeward Conference. And I want to thank you, dear God, for helping all of us who are members of the associations, whether it is the President's Association or the Health Council Association, for putting in our part, making sure that we are part of this great Health Week, 20th to the 27th of September. Tonight is our last night, but thank God we have tomorrow, the Sabbath day, and then we have Sunday. So if we did not take part before, there is another opportunity. I pray, dear God, that you will continue to listen to what we are saying. Help us, dear God, to be the persons that you want us to be. These mercies we ask in the precious name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Sister Joseph, for your prayer. This evening, I am your moderator, Dr. Bell Jarvis. First of all, a friend of God, and then a man, a wife of one husband, a mother of 2 children, and a pediatrician by profession. Tonight, we have with us 3 distinguished guests who are going to broach the topic of stress and emotional health. And so I'll introduce them to you this evening. Firstly, we have with us Corinne Norton, an author, counselor, trainer, consultant. Ms. Norton is committed to helping people to live a more fulfilling and happy life. She has worked with hundreds of individuals and numerous organizations in the Caribbean and in the United States, teaching life skills and coping skills that aid them in meeting the demands in various areas of their lives. Her formal training includes having an associate's in business administration, a bachelor's in behavioral science, a master's in social work, world of work specialization. She's also a certified employee assistance professional. And so tonight, she is more than qualified by the grace of God to discuss this topic. Ms. Norton, say good evening to us, please.
Good evening to everyone, and I wish you all a pleasant Sabbath. And it is my pleasure to be spending some time with you tonight. I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you so much. Our next speaker, Dr. Cameron Knowles, a medical doctor who has worked at the Clearview Psychiatric Hospital here in Antigua for the past 5 years. He partners with churches, schools, and other organizations in bringing aid and awareness to mental health issues and support efforts to destigmatize those affected by mental illness. Before working in mental health, he successfully completed his internship at the Mount St. John's Medical Center, where he worked as a general practitioner. Dr. Knowles serves at the John Hughes SDA Church as an ordained elder, and he enjoys teaching Sabbath school, spending time with family, and watching sports. I'm sure he uses that to de-stress. Dr. Knowles, welcome to the platform this evening. Please say hello to the brethren.
Thank you, and happy Sabbath.
Thank you so much. And then we have with us Charity Dublin. She's currently employed as a community nutrition officer within the Ministry of Health, Wellness, and the Environment here in Antigua and Barbuda. She holds a BSc in Nutrition and Dietetics and is currently pursuing an MSc in Public Health Nutrition. She has had the privilege of working as a dietetic intern in various clinical and community settings in Trinidad and Tobago, Antigua and Barbuda, and Grenada. If you have seen Charity before, you know that she is passionate about nutrition education and increasing nutrition and health literacy. And so it is our privilege this evening to welcome Charity to speak with us. Charity, say good evening.
Good evening, everyone. I am so happy to be here. Happy Sabbath.
Thank you so much. And so life is a challenge, so much stress. We have been stressed before COVID and even more so during times of COVID. But many times, mental health and even emotional health has been stigmatized. And so tonight, before we go into our discussion, I'm hoping to lay the foundation on which we will build. And so the World Health Organization defines mental health as a state of well-being in which the individual realizes his or her own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. However, mental health disorders express a broad range of problems. They are characterized by an abnormal thought, emotion, behavior, and even relationship with others. But mental health and emotional health are often used interchangeably or even synonymously, but they're not one and the same. Emotional health is having both an awareness of your emotions and the ability to manage and express these feelings in an appropriate manner. So the first take-home point this evening is that mental health and emotional health, even though they are very close, they are distinctly different. And so this brings us to our first question. Why is emotional health important? And who is at risk for emotional ill health? Why is emotional health important? And who is at risk for emotional ill health? While our panelists prepare to answer this question, we invite you to place your questions within the chat as we communicate. Please put the word question before what you desire to ask so that your questions can be easily detected. So the first question, why is emotional health important and who is at risk for emotional ill health? Ms. Norton, do you care to start first, please?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So emotional health is often what we see from a person. How do they show their anger? How do they show their frustration? How do they show their irritation? And the reason it's important is because no matter where we are in life, whether we're at home, whether we're in traffic, whether we're at work, even in church, we're subject to becoming angry, to provocation, to people irritating us, stepping on our toes. And if we are not emotionally healthy, then we can react in ways that are not appropriate. First of all, some of us don't even realize how we behave and how our behavior impacts others. So if we have a healthy level of emotional health, we will know what our triggers are. Like I would know, okay, if angry people make me get angry, or if someone speaking badly about me makes me upset, or what makes me feel unloved. So when we know what our own triggers are, we're able to prepare ourselves through it. We're able to strengthen ourselves so we know what situations not to put ourselves in. So that's one important part of it, knowing where, what our triggers are, where we can be triggered, and knowing how to react appropriately. Jesus got angry, Jesus got sad, but we have to, there's a right way of reacting so that we don't affect ourselves negatively or affect others.
Very important point. We have to know what our triggers are for emotional ill health, and we have to know how to appropriately handle our emotions. Believe it or not, we're emotional beings. And so as you said, as you rightly said, we will all have that point in time where our emotions have to be adjusted based on the scenario in which we are. And so we have to know how to deal with our emotions. Dr. Knowles, what are your thoughts?
So someone who is emotionally healthy is able to think rationally and behave rationally also, right? And if we stray away from that, then we begin to complicate our lives a little bit more. We begin to cause ourselves a little more stress. So being emotionally healthy, as Ms. Norton says, is extremely, extremely important because emotional health also plays a role in our thoughts and our behavior and our mental health also. So it's extremely important that we are able to recognize our behaviors and our emotions and able to control them accordingly.
Okay, great. And so we recognize that emotional ill health is really not something that belongs to one particular group of people. It really can affect every individual at different phases in our lives. So do you care to share with us tonight some examples of scenarios in our life, even as Christians, that will trigger emotional ill health? Any examples come to mind? We can start with you, Dr. Knowles, since you already have the floor.
Divorce, losing our jobs, COVID-19.
Oh, yeah.
All right. All right. These are some examples now, especially a death of someone in the family, close friend, right? Someone who we interact with every day. These are powerful stressors that can cause our emotional health to begin to, I don't say dwindle, but to fluctuate.
Okay. Ms. Norton, in your experience as well, can you share some examples of triggers of emotional ill health?
Okay, so it varies. Like we mentioned, we have different triggers. For me, it's being in traffic and persons not indicating or stopping in front of me to speak with someone else on the road. And I have to tell myself, okay, take it easy, it's not personal. And even for those of us who are Christians, it's problematic. Some of us have had to sit on church board meetings or sit in business meetings, and we hear things that we don't agree with. And sometimes that difference in opinion, while it's not a bad thing, leads us to really escalate and become so angry that some of us go home with a headache. So a lot of emotional stress can be based on the circumstances in which we find ourselves, how we relate to others, and a lot of it differs by age. If a 17-year-old youth loses their cell phone, or their parents take the cell phone from them, and they go into anger, they slam their door, they go into the room, they don't want to speak with anybody, they refuse to eat. Someone who's 75 that lose their cell phone, it might not be a big deal, you know? So a lot of the things that trigger us emotionally are based on our age, are based on the strength of our faith, are based on our support system. Some of us, when we're triggered, we pick up the phone and we call somebody and we say, this is bothering me. And by the time we get off the phone, we're okay. Some people who have nobody to call or who are isolated, they sit there and that thing just boils up in them. So there's so many circumstances that, that cause a different reaction in different persons. And it's very individual, and there are also some collective aspects to it.
Okay, thank you so much. I have here a list that I'm going to share that persons have over the years expressed as being stressful in their lives. Social isolation, we made mention of this, or loneliness. So we have families where, it's the empty nest. The children have gotten older, they've gone off to university, their parents are left alone, and this feeling of social isolation, especially now in times of COVID, where even those who have chronic illnesses or even who are a bit older and able to go out to church, this feeling of isolation or loneliness has caused them to be stressed. Child abuse, trauma, neglect, social disadvantage, poverty, or even debt. So we're trying to make it practical tonight. We're trying to make it real tonight. Many of us have used our credit cards, right? To buy things that we do need, but sometimes that we don't need. And then we go into debt, but it causes undue stress. It leads to emotional ill health because we then become anxious. We then become depressed because what? The bill is mounting and it's very hard to recover, especially when the interest goes on. Persons who have taken on more than they can manage. So many of us are overachievers and our calendars are booked to the brim. And so when we take on more than we can handle, I see Ms. Norton smiling, we become very stressed, and we can become stressed even within the church. Being a long-time carer for someone. So you have someone who may be elderly or who has a chronic illness, someone who, for example, may need to have dialysis 3 times a week, and you have to be going and coming, even now in terms of school, where the school days are shorter, you have to leave work, go out into traffic, pick up the children, get them back to an area of care, go back to work. This can be stressful. Domestic violence, we mentioned this week. Significant trauma as an adult, loss of a loved one, chronic diseases, all of these can be stressful. Now, my question to you, can stress ever be healthy? Is stress ever healthy? Very interesting question. Let's see your response to this. Ms. Norton, you'll start us off here. Unmute.
Yes, a little bit of stress sometimes helps, For example, when we had our young persons who were recently studying for CXC and CAPE, some of them had a very healthy dose of concern because they wanted to get good grades to get into college or get a job. And it became a little stressful, but if it's not taken to the extreme, it can be good because it helps you to prepare for a situation. Persons getting married, persons getting a promotion, somebody relocating by choice. You're happy to move to a different area. You're excited about it, but there's a lot of things that you have to take care of. So if there's a little bit of stress, and stress basically is any change, your body's reaction to a change, to an event, it's not so bad. But when that gets to the point where you can't handle it, you're feeling overwhelmed, you're feeling like life is out of control, then you need to pause. Then you really need to pause and take stock and regroup. But a little bit is okay if it's going to propel us to positive action.
Okay,
Yes.
so sometimes stress can boost us in the right direction. Dr.
Yes.
No-
All right. So good stress is called EU stress, right? Same way we can stress our muscles physically and grow, right? Good stress is also good for us, right? Stress can help us to boost our brain power. It can increase our short-term immunity. It can make us more creative, right? But the issue becomes when the stress becomes prolonged. That's when we start to get a problem. If it's prolonged stress, then there's an issue, right? But if it's a stress that we are able to manage, because every day our body gets its wear and tear, our brain gets its wear and tear every day, right? But it's not necessarily bad for us. You have good stress, you have bad stress, and good stress is actually good for us, right? So not all stress is bad stress. Thank you.
Okay, very interesting concept there, and I'm looking forward to see some comments coming on the chat as to whether or not you believe that stress can actually be good. But I love that example that you gave in terms of our muscles, the fact that we know some of us go to the gym and we're lifting weights and we can see the growth. You know, sometimes if we're not going through a difficult scenario, we may not grow. And so stress sometimes can be or can have useful gain. And so before I go to our next question, where we focus on stressors in children and then nutrition, so Charity, you can get ready, I want to share some brief facts with you. Did you know that more than 350 million people worldwide live with depression? It not only affects persons living with it, but it also affects their loved ones as well. Did you know that untreated depression is the #1 cause of suicide and the 3rd leading cause of death among teens? Did you know that depression is responsible for more than 850,000 deaths worldwide every year? In any year, 20% of adolescents experience a mental health problem. And so we go to our children and our adolescents. What type of stressors do children and adolescents face? Are they similar to that which adults face? I'd like to hear your take on this. Are children stressed, or are they just happy-go-lucky, you know, not having a care in the world? They're cared for, fed, clothed, they don't have to go to work per se. So do children really experience stress? And if so, what are the stressors that may be unique, if so, to children?
Okay, I see Dr. Noah's letting the lady go before the gentleman.
Correct.
All right, so children do feel stress. Yes, they have a lot of things that are taken care of for them, but every household is different and every circumstance is different. And what we have seen in actual practice, and Dr. Bell Jarvis, I'm sure you're going to weigh in on this aspect too, is that some children live in homes where they're not properly fed, where they don't have the basic necessities of life that a child is supposed to have, that love, that attention, that care. Some do get the food and the shelter, but nobody's hugging them. Nobody's saying, you're special, you're worthwhile, I care about you, you're going to be something great. And so sometimes they're starved for affection. We also have some children who persons take very inappropriate actions with them in terms of molestation and abuse, and that causes a lot of stress. Another thing that we've noticed that causes a lot of stress in our children is parents who are having a lot of extreme conflict. And they believe, okay, we're staying together for the children. But what they're doing is actually harming the children because they're screaming and shouting at each other every night. The child can't sleep in peace. They're calling each other's names. And it gets so bad to the point where some children, when they hear the vehicle of their parents pull up in the driveway or the door, the key being turned in their door, they start trembling, they start wetting themselves, they start feeling extreme anxiety. So yes, children do have stressors, and a lot of it stems from the fact that they don't have a lot of control over a lot of things. So they have to depend on their caregivers to take care of them. So we as adults need to be very mindful of how we speak around children. Are we sending them out to the Mega Man to say, we're not home? Are we encouraging them to lie? Are we teaching them to be selfish? Are we allowing an uncle to babysit them, although they've told us they're uncomfortable with this uncle? So as adults, we need to be mindful of the stressors we're putting children under. And also we have some children who parentified. The parent is an alcoholic, or the parent is always tired. The child has to be doing everything in the home. So yes, children do find themselves stressed a lot.
Okay.
Yes, and I also completely agree. Parents having problems within the household is extremely stressful to children. Sometimes we think we don't know, because as Christians, sometimes we tend not to argue in front of the children, but they can sense the tension. Even when you're not arguing, they can sense the conflict in between the mother and the father, right? But something that's important too, the birth of another sibling can also be a stressor, right? When a child, especially like a 2-year or 3-year-old child, when a newborn is brought after that child, and the mother or the father have to pay more attention to the baby than them, that is also a very hard stressor for them. In school, you have bullying, which is quite frequent, right? And you have teachers who are at times not as attentive to a child because he or she might be slower than usual. And a lot of us don't get it, but those in the medical field do. Sometimes parents do also, but children pick up on a lot of things that adults don't, right? So the minor things that we think that are not important to us, children do pick up on it very, very quickly. Now, as the child grows older, how do I put it now? Attractiveness can also be a stressor. All right? Because if a child is growing up and is being spoiled then, and then end up in school, and the situation in school is different from home, right? You know that the bullying in school is called names. I was called a lot of names in school. I was called a nerd in school all the time because I studied and I used to have a big bag on my back every day going to school with 13 books inside of it, right? So, and in my village, I was the only fair-skinned person, so they used to call me white boy, right? So, or yellow man, back when I was younger. But these are things that can stress a child, not having enough privacy, right? So if the sibling is living with 4 or 5 other children in the same room, and it's one bathroom for 8 or 9 people within the house, that can also be a stressor. Sibling rivalry, as I said before, can be a stressor. Even taking a test, an exam, can be a stressor. Right? So these are just added on to what was said before.
Okay, and so I love those answers. I want to join with you by adding some things to the list. I definitely endorse worrying about schoolwork or grades. So sometimes we as parents, yes, we want our children to do well, but sometimes you have to ease back on the pressure a little bit. You get to see again, you know, when are you going to get an A? You don't see Tom Jones' child, you know, getting A's all the time. You need to improve.
Right.
Juggling responsibilities, schoolwork, work at home. Sometimes I see this in the chat already. Some persons are saying that, you know, the role of parenting is put onto the eldest of the siblings, taking care of the younger ones, preparing the meals, washing. Yes, we want our children to be somewhat domesticated, but we have to have a balance. Bullying, Dr. Nosy mentioned that, change in schools, moving, having negative thoughts about themselves. Our adolescents have an issue sometimes with body image, and believe it or not, as we struggle with childhood obesity, the issues with body image will increase. We have been seeing an increase in adolescents crying out, either taking pills or even trying to slit the wrists, and we're going to get real this evening, in an attempt to cry out for attention. Children are going through body changes as they go through puberty. You know, they're stressed during those times, money problems in the family, and even living in unsafe homes and even unsafe neighborhoods. Now let's switch the gear a little bit to nutrition. Charity, can diet have an impact on brain health and emotional well-being? Does what we eat impact our mental health in any way?
So the short answer is yes. And it's funny because brain function and mental health is not something that we immediately think about when we're talking about the foods that we eat and drink, the diet that we have. And if I can use this analogy, our brain and the foods that we eat, it's similar to having a very expensive car or very expensive high-performing machine where it needs adequate, appropriate, high-quality food in order to function effectively. And a part of our brain's function includes managing our emotions and our mood. So what we really want to do is encourage people to eat high quality foods that are culturally specific to us here in the Caribbean. And we want foods that contain lots of vitamins, minerals, antioxidants that are going to nourish our brain and protect it from things like oxidative stress. So we need this for proper growth and development. Even as adults, our bodies are still growing, cells are still being reproduced, they're still being produced and repaired. So we do need to ensure that we're still eating a nutritious, high quality food. And in order to feel more emotionally balanced and to foster good and positive energy, we need to do this through our nutritional choices to ensure that our food is giving us, yes, nourishment, but also energy, joy, and as I said, appropriate fuel.
Okay.
If I may add something to that, I love what Charity said. I love listening to her in the mornings on ABS. And I loved hearing what she said tonight. And you know, one of the things I told a parent earlier this year is that you're abusing your child when you give that child so much sugar. If you're going to every single day put in this child's lunch kit, I know we have budgetary and issues and financial limitations. But if you're going to put in this child's lunch kit every single day, all these sweet foods and all these chips and the box juices with all the sugar, I told a parent and she was really mad at me that it's almost to the point of being abusive, the amount of sugar that child was consuming daily, you know?
Right.
Because
children and adults, we have the right to healthy food, regardless of our resources, regardless of our level of skills, regardless of where we live. So one of my greatest passions is making nutrition, information, and education accessible to anyone, regardless of budgetary constraints or anything like that. And I'm so happy that you brought up that point about what we're feeding our children, because there's actually a recent study that is showing that children and adolescents who consume fast foods, sugary foods, soft drinks, that type of thing, they have more trouble concentrating in schools. So we think that we're helping our children by giving them these things that we as parents didn't have growing up. However, we are negatively impacting their future. We're negatively impacting their grades. And it's something that we have to really be cognizant of, and we have to think about it. I always tell people, think before you eat, think before you drink. You don't have to make major changes. We just have to acknowledge the fact that changes have to be made.
Okay, so we want to keep it practical tonight, Charity. Times are hard. Persons have lost their jobs. You know, persons have been laid off and having delayed payments, which are yet to be received. So in times of financial constraints, can you give us some examples of foods that can be selected, which are appropriate to our budgets, which are restricted at this time, to boost our mental health? Give us a few examples, please.
So the first thing that I do want to point out here is that there is no specific food that's going to magically boost brain health. There is no specific, I'm not a fan of the term superfood, because all foods work together in a very complex system in order to ensure that we're getting the nourishment and the fuel that we need. There is no one magic food. I'm going to say it again. However, what I'm going to speak about a little tonight are some foods that we can incorporate into a very balanced diet in order to give us those nutrients and nourishment. So the first thing that we want to point out here is that all of these foods have some things in common. So brain boosting foods tend to contain one or more of the following nutrients: antioxidants and phytochemicals. These we're mainly going to find in plant-based foods. And they have in things such as carotenoids, flavonoids, and vitamin E, which is what I'm sure that we hear a lot. They also contain B vitamins, healthy fats, omega fatty acids, which is another buzzword, as well as complex carbs. So these are general foods, but there are ways to make them work for any budget. And of course, there are also alternatives that can be used. So the first thing is going to be leafy greens. It doesn't matter the type of leafy green. It can be spinach, it can be bok choy, it can be lettuce, it can be broccoli, it can be whatever you have available, whatever you have growing in your garden. And the thing with leafy greens, as I mentioned before, they're going to contain those antioxidants, those phytochemicals, vitamin K, vitamin E, these things that promote healthy cell growth and help to reduce inflammation. Another thing that I know is very popular now is turmeric. And you don't necessarily have to go out and purchase turmeric, but it's something that can actually be grown in our backyards. We can dry it, we can grind it, we can grate it and incorporate it into our meals. And it will make our meals very flavorful. And in addition to that, it's going to be improving our brain's oxygen intake, increasing memory and cognitive function. And of course, it is very beneficial for the immune system. The next one is fatty fish. So I know when people hear fatty fish, they often think of salmon. Yes, that's a great source of healthy fats and omega-3 fatty acids, which are very important for brain health. But salmon is expensive. It's pricey, especially when you're on a budget. So there are other low-cost types of fatty fish that can be used. So for example, tuna or sardine, these are great alternatives. You don't have to use salmon. You can incorporate tuna and sardine in very creative ways in your meals in order to consume the omega-3 fatty acids that you require. And what this has been proven to do is lower risk of dementia, risk of strokes, that type of stuff, in addition to helping to enhance memory. And this is especially important as individuals get older. Nuts and seeds. And with this one, you have a lot of flexibility. You can use peanuts, you can use pumpkin seeds, you can use almonds, you can use whatever seeds you can afford, whatever seeds you enjoy eating, because these as well will contain those healthy fats as well as omega-3 fatty acids and antioxidants, vitamin E, which will really help to reduce what we call oxidative stress, which is caused by free radicals, which can really impact our brain health. Avocados, and these are so plentiful when they're in season, especially if you have a neighbor who has a tree. They're good for you, and they have those healthy monounsaturated fats again. So what they do is they promote blood flow and they support the information carrying nerves that we have in the brain. They also have a lot of other important nutrients for brain health, like folate, vitamin C, vitamin E, copper. The two last foods that are really important would be whole grains, or what we call complex carbohydrates. So in the Caribbean, we have a lot of ground provisions: sweet potatoes, cassava, yam, edo, dasheen. And in addition to things like brown rice, whole grain, bread, that type of stuff, they contain carbohydrates, yes, but these are complex carbohydrates. So they come packaged with fiber and other nutrients, which really help to slow the release of the sugar contained in these foods. And that helps to give our brains a steady supply of glucose, which is needed to fuel it and to keep it functioning. The last point that I would really like to mention would be soybean products. So like soy milk or tofu, because these contain a specific antioxidant called polyphenols. And these have been linked to reduced risk of dementia and also improved cognitive ability. So really and truly, you want to try to incorporate as many plant-based foods as you can, because if you notice here, with the exception of fish, most of these are plant-based foods. So that's what we want to do. We want to get as many of our vitamins, nutrients, our carbohydrates from these plant-based foods so that we can nourish and fuel our bodies, as well as enjoy the foods that we're eating.
Wow, definitely a mouthful. And if you're not hungry after listening to Charity, then I'm not sure it will cause you to be hungry. Especially like that point about the avocados, especially if they're hanging on the tree in your neighbor's yard. We're not asking you to steal this evening, but you may kind of have to just get one or two of the avocados to help with having a healthy diet. Now we recognize that even if we do have a healthy diet, there are several things that will really predispose us to having mental health challenges. We recognize that we have to look at our genetics, the building blocks that make us who we are, that which is passed on from parent to child, that which is responsible for the color of our hair, the color of our eyes. We recognize that we are living in an environment, one where we're exposed to environmental stressors, toxins, alcohol, drugs. We know that we also have the whole issue of the brain chemistry. And so tonight, I also wanted to touch a little bit on mental health because it's so important. And so the question on the floor now is, what are the leading causes of mental health issues in Antigua, and by extension, the other territories within SLC, as well as other Caribbean countries and the international arena? And this question goes to you, Dr. Knowles. What are the leading causes of mental health illness or issues in Antigua and Barbuda, St. Kitts Nevis, Montserrat, other countries, and by extension, internationally?
Well, the number one factor for mental health is the stress and the inability to cope with whatever stress is brought onto you, right? Also, we have our socioeconomic factor, which includes poverty, low education, etc. Right? And at least in Antigua for me, substance abuse is extremely high. I had a meeting yesterday with a psychiatrist from Trinidad, and he also stated that substance abuse now in the Caribbean is increasing drastically, right? And it's actually overtaking the other stressors, such as the socioeconomic factors, such as genes, your family having it, etc. So those are the three that I'm mainly concerned with: the socioeconomic factor, which is poverty, lack of schooling, lack of education, right? And substance abuse. All right. Also now, coming into 2020, we have the COVID-19, which is an extremely high stressor, right? We may not have at this moment a lot of people coming into Clearview, but in Jamaica, it is actually on the increase admissions because of COVID-19, and they actually now have 3 different specific wards in the main hospital just for that alone, right? So it is on the increase, and it is becoming an important factor for us to recognize, right?
Okay, so we see that substance misuse is really, going up. We recognize that even in pregnancy, one of the challenges that we're having now as pediatricians is that we're recognizing that our mothers are utilizing marijuana during pregnancy, and they're also drinking alcohol. And again, because so much is not yet known about marijuana, some persons are saying, it is beneficial, and so they smoke straight throughout pregnancy, not recognizing the impact that they can have on themselves as well as on the unborn child. The use of alcohol as well, although some, would say, well, I'm using a little bit for the stomach's sake, they actually drink throughout pregnancy, not recognizing, again, the negative impact it can have both on themselves as well as on the unborn child. And other mental disorders that we really need to look at would include depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, other psychosis, dementia. We really need to know how to care for our aging family, because dementia is real, and even developmental issues in our children, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and even autism. So these are some of the things that we'll have to look at, but we will go through them very briefly this evening. Are you hearing us well? I'm seeing in the chat that someone is not really hearing, but I'm hoping that the audio will become clearer and we'll try to project a bit better. Dr. Knowles, you have
a point to make here, right? In the Caribbean, schizophrenia is the #1 illness, followed by mood disorders such as depression and bipolar, followed by substance abuse affective disorder. And that was a study that was done in 2009, 2010. However, over the past 10 years, substance abuse affective disorder has overtaken mood disorder. It hasn't passed schizophrenia yet, because at times, those who are suffering from substance abuse affective disorder, that's what we call it now, right? Or that's what we call it now, substance abuse affective disorder. They eventually become schizophrenic, right? So schizophrenia has been maintained as the #1, followed now, recently, by substance abuse affective disorder. Now, I've been told to explain what substance abuse affective disorder is, right? It is a psychotic disorder caused by, when we say substance, we mean drugs, marijuana, crack, cocaine, heroin, alcohol, right? So in psychiatry, we try not to stigmatize. So we don't say marijuana or cannabis induced now anymore. So we say substance or alcohol induced or heroin induced. We don't use a specific drug. We just say substance abuse affective disorder, which covers all drug-related psychotic disorders, right? So it is now overtaken mood disorders such as bipolar, or depression and anxiety disorders, etc. That's a point to me. And because I've done a lot on this on marijuana, we need to differentiate between the THC and the CBD, right? Because
we have to break that down, Dr. Knowles, and also what the abbreviations mean.
I didn't want to be too long, right?
Yes, not too long, but let's make it clear. We want everyone to be on the same footing, understanding everything that you said.
I'm going to use marijuana because that's the main one, especially in the Caribbean and in Antigua. It is marijuana, cannabis, whatever you may call it, right? Marijuana has two main substances, which is it has over 100 what we call cannabinoids inside of it, but the two main ones are the THC and the CBD. The THC is psychoactive. This is what causes us to get the high. Okay? However, back in the 1970s and 1960s, the THC was roughly less than 2%. 2%. In 2020 now, we have the THC, which is a psychoactive substance in the marijuana, up to 30%. And this is a change that's been happening in the cannabis industry. So the THC, in our brains, we have cannabinoid receptors 1 and 2, right? And this is why taking marijuana at a young age, especially those that are high in THC, affects our young children so much, because cannabinoid in our brain is responsible for the formation of our synapses. Dr. Barrow.
Yes, we'll leave it there.
Okay.
Guys, based on what you're saying, that marijuana.
Yeah, it's a psychotic substance, the THC, and that is what causes change in behavior. That's what causes high. It can be addictive, and that's the issue that we have with marijuana. Not the CBD. Yes, it's good for us. The CBD is good for us, but not the THC. And recently, we have been growing a strain that increases the THC and not the CBD, basically, in simple terms.
Okay, right? So we're learning a bit this evening, but I also want to highlight other things that can be addictive.
Right.
Move on, things like sugar.
Mm-hmm.
We can't eat our cornflakes or cereal without adding 1 or 2 tablespoons of sugar. Believe it or not, the olivos oil can be very addictive as well. You find that persons have to carry around an olivos oil and sniff it every morning, afternoon, night, or you don't feel good. Olivos oil can be very addictive. Sniffing of glue, that can be very addictive. Now we're going to go over to how we identify someone who is stressed and how we can manage stress in the workplace as well as in the home. But before that, you know, I like to give you some facts here. Let me just give you something about anxiety. Did you know that 1 in 13 persons globally suffer from anxiety? 1 in 13. We have 79 persons within the Zoom meeting right now, and somebody can do the math quickly for me. 1 in 13 persons have anxiety. And in developing countries, approximately 75% of people with mental disorders remain untreated, and we're going to discuss why. In developing countries, approximately 75% of people with mental disorders remain untreated. And this is an important fact. Now, I'm going to briefly mention some things before we go into how do we identify, so panelists think about it, how do we identify that someone is stressed? Okay, and then we'll go on to how do we deal with stress in the workplace or in the home, especially in our spouses, okay? So depression, a very common mental disorder, one of the main causes of disability worldwide. It is characterized by sadness. So listen out, please, see if you're feeling any of these. Loss of interest or pleasure, feelings of guilt or low self-worth, disturbed sleep or appetite, tiredness, and poor concentration. Believe it or not, people with depression have many physical complaints that cannot be explained. So sometimes you have persons who are coming back and forth to the doctor with complaints and they're not finding a cause. Just screen yourself. Look and see if you have any features of depression. Bipolar disorder, we hear about this all the time. It typically consists of what we call a manic phase, where we're hyper alert, hyper excited, spending a lot, speaking fast, and then we go into periods of depression. So again, we have an elevated mood or an irritable mood. There's overactivity, rapid speech, inflated self-esteem, decreased need for sleep, and then we plummet into that phase of depression. And we mentioned schizophrenia. This is characterized by distortions in our thinking, perception, emotions, and language. So persons may have hallucinations, so they may hear things that others don't hear. They may see things that others don't see. They may even feel things that others don't feel, or they may be paranoid. I remember we had a patient once who said, somebody sent you to kill me, you know? They're having features of paranoia, or my family's trying to kill me by putting poison in the rice. Okay, so this is just to sort of build your vocabulary as well as to build the experience as to some of the mental health issues that are being faced worldwide. So Ms. Norton, how can you identify someone who is stressed?
Okay, well, you did give some tips already how to identify them. So if you have a family member or a co-worker and all of a sudden you notice they quite often look withdrawn, sometimes they're isolating when they're not used to. All of a sudden they're complaining their hair dropping out, they're having pains and there's no medical explanation. The person is not interested in the things they used to be interested in. Those are some signs. Anything that shows drastic change in behavior. Sometimes it's drastic and sometimes it's sudden, depending on, it's a slower onset depending on the situation. We also want to look at, as we mentioned earlier, there's the emotional wellness, which is linked to mental health. You can start to tell that someone's mental health issues are becoming increased or their stress level is becoming increased if they're having a lot of emotional outbursts. Now, we all get angry and we all get frustrated. But if at the slightest provocation, this person flies off the handle and it seems unreasonable, or there's something simple happening in the office, somebody kills a mosquito and the person bursts into tears, that means the person's emotions are just simmering right under the surface. You need to pull that person aside if you have that sort of relationship and find out if something is going on. So we need to be very observant of those around us, the people we work with, our elderly parents, our children, our co-workers. Anytime we see sudden changes in behavior, for teenagers, sometimes there's a lot of isolating. There's sometimes their rooms start being very untidy. They don't want to change their clothes. They suddenly can't sleep. Sleep is a very, very big thing that we don't have enough time to talk about, but that's very big when it comes to emotional and mental stress. So we have to look at changes that are physical, mental, emotional, and those reactions. And we need to be very observant and look for them in ourselves too. And as Dr. Bell Jarvis said, go through a checklist. And especially if the person has had a recent trauma, a recent loss of job, loss of partner, or a major change in their life event, then that tells you, okay, something could be going on.
Okay.
And we need to be our brother's keeper, really.
Sure. So we see that we may have outbursts that really are not called for. It's sort of, a bit above and beyond what is required in a particular situation. Or we may recognize that a person has a significant emotional response in terms of being tearful, when for something that may not be as significant. So those are some of the things that will tell us, okay, yes, this person is having a hard time emotionally. But Dr. Knowles, can you tell us, how can we deal with our emotional health? How can we handle the stressors that we are exposed to?
What's important for us is the ability to understand what's happening around us. And also, for me, education, right? If I'm able to know that my reaction, well, this is a term that we use, having insight, right? That's a term that we use in medicine, right? If I have insight, I'm able to see and understand that my behavior is not appropriate. That's very important. So if I know that my behavior is not appropriate and I can adjust accordingly, I can go to whatever coping mechanism is best for me at that time, then that's very important, right? So let's, for example, if somebody kills a mosquito in the office and I am so stressed out that I react to it, I should be able to look back and say, no, this is too much for me right now. Let me withdraw from the situation. Let me take a break. Let me move away from it. Let me find some coping mechanism that would bring down my stress levels. It's important to know when you're stressed, right? And it's important to know that when I am stressed, this and this and this and this is what I can do to cope with my stress. If we don't do that, then we cause the situation to get worse, and we will eventually become ill or sick because of it. So the most important thing is to have insight, know, to understand, and to have coping mechanisms that we can use to cope with whatever stress factor is brought upon us.
Okay, and Ms. Norton, some of these coping mechanisms, we want to practically know how to better manage our emotions. So yes, we're going to have insight. We're going to recognize that, I'm not handling situations well. I'm flying off the wall. I'm shouting at my children. I'm overreacting with my husband. I may think I have a difficult boss and I'm snapping at everybody. What are the coping mechanisms that I as an individual can take to appropriately manage my emotions?
Okay, so, sorry.
Go ahead,
no,
Ms. Norton.
Ms. Norton, yes.
Okay, all right, so I like the awareness. I like the awareness that Dr. Knowles talked about. We need to know ourselves and be able to tell when we're starting to use the term fall apart. In terms of coping mechanisms, we always encourage our patients, clients, persons we speak with to have a support system. We use the term no man is an island, right? If you have a partner at home, if you have a pastor, a best friend, a sister, a mom, a child, it's always good to have a support system, somebody you can call on at any time, who you can feel they have a non-judgmental relationship with you, and you can talk and you can vent and you can say, I'm really having a bad day. So it's really important to have that support system of people that you know. It's important to have, I always ask people to have a toolbox. It might not be a physical toolbox, but a toolbox, a symbolical toolbox. So that toolbox will have your support system. It will have your list of texts. People pass around these texts, what sound to say when you're angry, what to say when you're in distress, what to say when you're emotional. We have that. Some of us have books we read, some of us have music. It's important to watch your diet, as Charity says. Certain foods make you feel even more down. If you're going to take a lot of sugar that gives you a temporary high, or a lot of heavy carbs, it can actually make you feel really down. It's important to have good quality sleep. I'm a big advocate of sleep. People who don't sleep are cranky. They're difficult to be around. It's important to make use of our natural resources in Antigua. Go to the beach. God gave us nature, and we are blessed in Antigua and Barbuda and around the Caribbean with the beach, the sea, the sand, putting your toes in the sand and just wiggling it around. That's therapy right there. Sitting out in the sunlight, that's helpful for people with depression. Being around certain people, places, and things that bring you joy. Some of us complain and we're stressed out, but yet we find ourselves within the same toxic circle of people day after day, week after week. How can we complain about being stressed and depressed when we keep putting ourselves in the same situation? It's really important as a tool for dealing with mental stress to know what to avoid, what we can adapt to, what we can alter. The serenity prayer says, God, give me the ability to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to do the difference. We do have some control over our lives. We might not have control over the place we work because we need an income, but we can decide during my lunch break, I will find a spot under a tree and I can read. We can decide not to answer certain people when they bring certain situations to us. The last thing I want to mention, because this is one of my favorite topics and I can go on and on and on, but Dr. Bell Jarvis will give me the stink eye. But one of the things that I would like for us to consider is the way we speak to ourselves when it comes to mental health, the things we tell ourselves, and the way we take a lot of things personally. A lot of us, we speak to ourselves in a way we wouldn't even speak to our dog. You're stupid, you're fat, We need to look at ourselves with love. We need to tell ourselves you are fearfully and wonderfully made, and God does not make mistakes. Some of us need to forgive ourselves for mistakes we have made in the past. We're living with guilt, living with shame, and the devil keeps bringing these mistakes back into our head. People keep telling us all the bad things we did 15 years ago. How can we have a proper mental health if we're living in the past? If we're allowing ourselves to walk around with a big bag of guilt. So we need to watch the things we tell ourselves. We need to remind ourselves of who we are. And we need to stop taking everything personally. Just because people are talking over there or laughing on the other side, it has nothing to do with us. Leave people alone if you're not sure what's going on, and focus on what matters to you. If we were to focus on what matters and spend time enriching our lives, giving back, serving God, looking at the positives in life, our lives will be much better. And the last thing I want to mention, if after you've tried everything, you're still having difficulty coping, seek professional help. We have a lot of stigma as it relates to mental health in Antigua, and that's why we have so many untreated cases. There is no shame in asking for help. The same way we go to a doctor if we have high blood pressure or diabetes, it's the same way. Find Dr. Knowles, find somebody to talk with, find Dr. Semper, she's very positive and upbeat, find somebody, talk to them, say, I'm having this problem. And especially our men. Women tend to talk more with each other and share burdens. Men tend to keep things inside like a pressure cooker. And then when that thing explodes, oh boy. So sorry to go on so much, but I feel like we really have the tools we need to be there for each other. We have God, we have each other, we have our music, we have our beaches, we have professionals in Antigua. We have no excuses whatsoever to not be able to take care of ourselves.
Indeed. Thank you so much. I see someone in the chat typing or shouting the New Start program is right at our fingertips, and trust in God is something that we cannot overestimate. So Charity, this question is for you. In dealing with nutrition and in dealing with varied clients, have you come across clients that are stressed? And even in your role dealing with nutrition, how do you deal with these clients who come into you stressed? After this question, we look at how do we cope with the stressful husband, the stressful boss, the stressful child, and the stressful church member. We'll deal with those quickly, and then we'll take a few questions from the chat. Okay, so we're gonna ask Charity how she has dealt with stressful clients in the past. And then we're gonna look at dealing with a stressful husband, stressful boss, stressful child, stressful church member. Okay, Charity?
All right. So I generally work a lot with children who may need nutritional counseling, as well as adults who suffer or who are living with NCDs, which are non-communicable diseases. And oftentimes, especially when someone has been newly diagnosed or they're having issues with their blood sugar, blood pressure, cholesterol management, it can feel very overwhelming, especially when they do not have that additional support at home. So there are times when people will literally sit down and just start crying because it feels like so much. It feels like they cannot handle it. So as a healthcare provider, what you have to do is you have to sit down and let them express these feelings, and then you find a way in which we can manage it individually and let them know that you do not have to do it alone. That's the first thing. You do not have to do it alone. There are persons here who have been trained to guide you and to break it down, to pre-digest it for you, to make it so much simpler for you to handle your condition. Because I think that is often something that is neglected when we speak about persons living with non-communicable diseases, the mental health aspect to it, the toll that managing their conditions can take on them. And this is one of my passions. So I do really encourage that if there are any of us here who have family members who are living with these types of conditions, that we check in ever so often. We ask them how they're doing, because sometimes they're afraid to speak up because they're afraid that they may be a burden on their family members, and they do not necessarily want persons to they don't want to have to ask persons to go out of their way to assist. So I think it's very important that we offer our support and that we take the initiative to reach out to those individuals. I hope I answered your question.
Okay, thank you so much. So we have to have that listening ear. Sometimes we're so quick to respond. We don't allow people to sort of distress. You know, we don't allow them to fully speak. We're so quick sometimes to give advice when sometimes all a person needs is a listening ear, and sometimes giving them the appropriate direction in terms of what steps to take. So Dr. Knowles, dealing with a difficult or stressful boss. Many of us are stressed at work. You know, the boss has significant demands, has an attitude that really has much to be desired. How do we deal with the stressful boss? Very quickly, I want our answers here to be 2 minutes as we strive to get through the stressful boss, etc.
A lot of times, there's nothing you can do with regards to the boss's behavior, but you can certainly adjust your behavior accordingly. And one of the most important things that I would like to talk about is patience, right? When I was an intern at the Mount St. John's Medical Center, I had a lot of bosses. Most weren't easy, right? But my thing is, what I do is, my consultant, I'm there to learn and to become the best person that I can be. It's all about our mindset, right? So I need to learn to be patient and to absorb as much information as I can, right? If you want respect, you have to, you won't just get it like that, right? You have to earn it. What I learned, if you want respect, you have to know what you're about, and you have to earn it. You have to learn patience, something the way we speak, right? Do unto others, I would have them do unto you. If you want someone to talk to you appropriately or to talk to you respectfully, you ought to also show that your behavior is also respectful towards them, right? A lot of the time, our bosses are, I won't say presumptuous, but a lot of them feel like they're above everybody, right? If you know what I'm talking about. A lot of the bosses feel like, hey, I'm the boss, do what I tell you to do. If you can't do it, then leave. If you can't do it, then don't bother me, right? At times, we need to understand, because our bosses go through stress also. We don't know what they're going through, right? So at times, the way that they deal with stress is different from how we deal with stress. So all I'm asking the first to do is to be understanding, to be patient, and to treat others as we want them to treat us. And with time, it will get better. Simply.
Good. So we have to be patient. We have to be willing to listen. And we also have to look within ourselves as well. Not only looking at the other person, but trying to look at things from a different perspective. And sometimes even making the best of a situation. If it is a case that we cannot continue in that negative situation, sometimes you need to approach the boss and say, you know what, in a friendly way. Sometimes I find that the way that you approach a situation really has a negative impact on me. You know, is this something that we can discuss? Face the issue head on sometimes take a step back and look at the scenario. Is it that you're overreacting? Was it said in a way that, you know, you really cannot tolerate? But always be willing to be patient, take a step back, look at the scenario, don't be afraid to approach the boss, and remember to be patient. Miss Norton, the stressful husband.
Well, I don't really have one, thank God for that. But it has to be one of the most challenging things in life to have to live with somebody who's stressful. With Dr. Knowles and the bosses and so on, you get to leave them there and come home. But then when you come home, that's supposed to be the place where you relax and unwind, right? And if you have a partner who is stressful, I want to encourage people to start off with the issue of communication. I like the 2 tips that Dr. Knowles gave in terms of the understanding, in terms of the listening. In a marriage, it can't only be about self. So if we're going to have a partner that's stressful, first of all, we have to ask, am I a problem too? Sometimes it's not one person causing the problem. So first of all, you examine yourself and see if you're contributing to the problem. If after that your hands are clean, you realize, okay, it's not me and it's the person, then you kind of have a little communication with them. What's happening with you? I've noticed you've changed lately. Is there anything going on? Maybe he or she's been stressed at work. Maybe he or she has a physical illness that's painful. Maybe he or she is going through something else and they're not sure how to deal with it. So we have a talk with them and we listen. We listen to what's being said and we listen to what's not being said and the body language. And then you could either go for counseling together, or if it's a situation that you can talk about and come up together with some solutions, because that is what you are as a helpmeet, someone to help the person. If after you've tried everything, the person is really not budging, then sometimes you're going to have to set boundaries so that the person's behavior just not completely make your whole life miserable. Because as Dr. Bell Jarvis said, we have to be practical. Sometimes we're going to try and we're going to realize, okay, couples counseling works, or listening to him works, or understanding him, or practicing the love languages and all those things. But there are times when nothing is going to work. Then what do? You try to be a dutiful partner, do your part, and then you set boundaries. You make time for yourself, you focus on self-care and pray about it, and hopefully that person comes around. But we're not going to be able to change all situations, but we do our best.
Okay, and I'll just speak to the stressful child. Sometimes we perceive that our children are stressful when they are actually reflectors of what they see. You know, sometimes when I look at my children, I see myself in them in so many ways. The exact way that I would respond to a situation, I see it in them. Sometimes, even if there's a shout, you know, like the older one sometimes likes to boss the younger one, but believe it or not, the younger one often bosses the older one. Behave yourself. You're doing the wrong thing. They sound just like me. So many times when we think that the children are stressful, sometimes they're reflecting what they do see. Other times we perceive that children are stressful because we want to go about doing what we have planned to do and we're not spending the appropriate time. So we're trying to complete a task, or we're on our phones, which is another big stressor in this day and age, right? We try to use it for relaxation, but it can be stressful for someone else. They're trying to get your attention, but you see the child as nagging. Mommy, come here. Daddy, come here. You're saying, can't you wait? And you see the child has been stressful, but the truth is they're just trying to get your attention. Okay, so we have to look at that. And then we have children who are sometimes stressful because of the way that they behave. Sometimes we can look at the timeout system. Sometimes we can look at rewarding positive behavior. And so we reinforce that which is positive, and the negative will gradually dissipate. And we strive to make changes from an early age. Don't wait until the child is 7 or 8 when you're going out and you're embarrassed to try to correct the habits that you see. Try to correct the negative aspects as soon as they are identified. Now, we've often heard the term, and we're factoring in the questions as we go along. And if you do want to ask a question, you may raise your hand and you may turn on your mic when you have been advised to do so as we wrap up. That stress kills. I want to hear your input on this. Stress kills. Is this a true statement, Dr. Knowles? Or is there much to be desired about this statement? Does stress really kill?
Stress is a factor that causes illness, and illness kills. So yes, stress can be associated with someone dying, right? Stress can cause my blood pressure to elevate and get a stroke because of it, die because of it, right? Stress can cause my diabetes to flare up, right? And I can end up in a coma because of it. Stress can cause stress can cause me to commit suicide, right? So yes, stress can cause us. It's a factor that can cause us to do things that we don't want to do and end up dying. Yeah.
And but Dr. Knowles, if we think about the flight or fight response, how you feel if you are frightened or if somebody is running you down, you feel that sort of heart racing, that sort of
adrenaline increases because yes.
When you're going through stress, your body is consistently in that mode. Correct. When you're going through that response, blood is moved away from your intestines, the less vital organs. And so stress actually affects your immune function, your ability to fight infection, as you would have alluded to. It affects growth, it affects digestion, it negatively affects memory. And so definitely stress leads to a decreased quality of life, can increase the uncontrolled nature of our chronic illnesses, and can increase mortality ultimately. Now, any questions at this point in time? Does anyone want to ask a question? Please do so by raising your hands. We have a question here, or statement and question. Mental stress is real. It is not easily recognized. How do I know when I am getting close to a nervous breakdown? This question is open to the floor. Mental stress is real. It's not easily recognized. How can I recognize when I am getting close to a nervous breakdown?
All right, I can answer that. For one, I don't want to confuse how we think, but if we have difficulty in concentration, we have difficulty learning, we have difficulty sleeping. If we notice that we are beginning to avoid our friends or social activities, if you go to church and we don't go to church anymore, if you're husband and wife and you notice change in your sex drive or your sex pattern, that can also become one of it also. If we notice that we are becoming excessively fearful and worried about things around us for no obvious reasons, right? Because that's important. At times we notice that everything causes us to be worried, right? If we feel a pain in our legs, we're worried. We think something might happen. We get a headache, we're worried something might happen. But these symptoms, you become alert, especially if you notice that you've been going through a stressful period for a long time, right? And if these are continuing for over 2 weeks, then be very careful, because then we are falling down into nervous breakdown. I like to use that term, but yes, right? That's not a term I like to use, but we are becoming ill, or we are progressing towards illness, towards a mental illness.
Thank you very much.
Okay, in addition to that, I also wanted to mention that one of the signs that a person can be approaching that state is if they have this sense of desperation and the increase in anxiety. You know, like if you have to go do public speaking or you have to take a test, you get these butterflies in your stomach. Well, such a person might be having butterflies in their stomach every day, all day. That feeling that you get, they have it a lot. And another sign that can tell you're heading down that road is if you're starting to feel hopeless about life. You can't see a future. You feel as if this is it. You're contemplating suicide. Every time you pass a bridge or a body of water, you feel as if, what will happen if I throw myself there? Who would miss me if something happened? And you start having these type of thoughts, then that's a red flag that you need to pay attention to.
Let me add on because I'm happy that Miss Norton is here too, right? We have something that's called coping with daily activities. If we notice that we're not cooking as we used to, it's simple, you know. We're not washing the dishes as we used to. We can't clean the house as we used to. We don't have a desire to get up in the morning and bathe or brush our teeth, right? Or to take care of ourselves, then, right? That's very important for us to take note of, right? If we are unable now to cope with our daily what we are accustomed to do every day, if we notice that we're not doing it as we used to do, very important.
Correct. Okay, so we need to ask 2 questions. Courtney has her hand up. Courtney, go ahead and unmute your mic. We want to facilitate 2 questions. Courtney's question and the question about the critical spirit of church members. Very important here. Courtney, go ahead.
Hi, good evening and happy Sabbath to the panelists and all those who are listening. There was some food that Sister Dublin mentioned as she was promoting, I think was good eating habits and food that give energy and nutrients and what's not. There was one that she mentioned which was soya. There has been news going around that soya product is contributed to cancer. And yet I heard her mention them. So I was just wondering, as an Adventist who would hear both sides, how do you reconcile those two? And which one is really true and which one is not?
Okay, thank you very much, Charity.
This is a very common question. And currently, there is no evidence that shows that soy contributes to cancer. When I speak about the evidence, I'm speaking about consensus. So when they examine all of the evidence and they've come up with one common consensus, it's that soy does not necessarily contribute to cancer. It may actually be protective against some forms of cancer. I know there's a huge issue when it comes to soy having estrogen-like compounds. However, because of human biology and physiology and how our bodies work, that is not a major concern. There are some men who may want to, I don't want to say avoid soy, but you may want to limit your intake. That is the only spot that research has really proven when it comes to soy perhaps not being beneficial. But I think for the general public, men, women, children included, the benefits of using soy or other plant-based sources of protein far outweigh the risk, especially when we're speaking about forms that have not been heavily processed, which is why I specifically mentioned the milk and tofu, because there are some forms of soy, like, you know, how we have the lynx and other things like that, that have been heavily processed. Those, like other types of ultra-processed foods, we would want to avoid. But those that have only been moderately or limitedly processed, it is, for the general public, safe to consume.
Thank you so much for your quick response. And very quickly, Ms. Norton, you have 1 minute to answer this question. Critical church members. How do we deal with this very common issue?
Okay.
Even
all right, so
meetings, which can be very stressful.
Okay, of course it can be stressful. The person at church who is very critical might not see themselves that way. In their perception, I am someone who's a caretaker of the church. I am someone who likes things done a certain way. I'm a woman or a man of principle. I'm a messenger of God. So we have to understand that even though someone appears critical to us or their behavior appears inappropriate for them, they might be thinking they're doing the right thing. So again, we must start with communication. We must start with communication. We must approach that person in love and without criticizing them. We can say to them, you know, Sister Norton, I've noticed that every time one of the young persons do something, you always have, you know, something like that. And can you try to be more supportive or something? I've also noticed that sometimes paying compliments to the person who's critical in terms of highlighting the good that they do that more. The same thing that Dr. Bell Jarvis talked about with children. Sometimes instead of picking on somebody's bad behavior, we need to highlight their good behaviors. And everybody loves to be complimented. They will keep doing that thing over and over again. But it's important to confront people with love. Let them know how their behavior is affecting others. Let them know how it's making them look. And maybe they'll have a chance to change or to do something else when they're realizing that they're not getting the intended outcome.
Okay, thank you so much. So we're now going to take our final summary from each one of our panelists. I want you to give your final statement this way. Life is stressful, but. Life is stressful, but. I probably should have told you guys this before so that you could have your statements well polished, but I want it to be spontaneous. I want it to be practical. As we summarize tonight's meeting, life is stressful, but. Let's start. We have 1 minute to go.
I can start. Life is stressful, but God is in control.
Life is stressful, but God is in control. I love that one.
Life is stressful, but help is available for everyone.
Life is stressful, but help is available to all. And Charity?
Life is stressful, but your nutrition and your health do not have to be.
I love that. Life is stressful, but your nutrition and your life doesn't have to be. And so tonight we are so happy that you decided to join us as we focused on emotional health. We recognized after our discussion this evening that stress is something that everyone faces in life, whether you are young or old. Emotional stress really does not have a choice in terms of religion, in terms of age, in terms of race. Everyone will experience an emotional crisis at some point in time. What is important rather is how we deal with it. We must have insight. Look at yourself, look at your timetable, look at, what is it in life that is stressing you? Are you taking on too much? Is it the work environment? Is it the fact that you're not sleeping, not exercising while your life seems to be out of balance? So insight is important. Having patience is important. Okay, you have to have patience with your children, with your spouse, with that difficult boss. Remembering the New Start program as means of coping with a stressful situation. Remember also that you have to sometimes take a step back. You may not always be able to address something immediately, but take a step back and then reapproach it with a different mindset. And then remember, all of our panelists have basically alluded to it. God is in control. Life can be stressful, but it's basically how you deal with it. So we thank you so much for joining us. Remember to join us tomorrow morning for our Divine Hour service, as well as joining us tomorrow afternoon. The link has been posted in the chat, and we're going to be discussing suicide, self-harm, and depression among young people, coping strategies in a broken world. I wish you a happy Sabbath. I wish for you a peaceful rest. And I know that the next time that I see you, you will not appear to be stressed, but rather you will seem very peaceful and very much in control. But remember, try to reach out for help if you do need it. And remember the triggers. Once you're seeing the triggers, take a second look. Now we invite Sister Byers to pray for us as we close.
Father God, I want to praise you tonight because you have given us many gifts. You have given us your Son, Jesus Christ, so that we can feel and be free. Lord, tonight I'm thankful for the panelists. I'm thankful for all those who are in the chat. Lord, I ask that as we reflect on you, we can recognize that even though we are stressful, that God, you're in control. Even though we are stressful, there's help on the way. Even though we are stressful, our health and nutrition doesn't have to be. Have your way with us, Lord, and may we open our hearts and let you in so that we can be the soldiers that you want. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a stress-free evening and a wonderful sleep. Happy Sabbath.
Nah.